Welcome to the Demystify Technology podcast from the MacLaurin Group.
Typically, you go through the due diligence process. What the world of private equity?
Right. Can't wait. Demystify it.
Welcome back. It's the yearly dip into the Stack Overflow developer survey with our old friend, and I mean that not in tenure, or not in age, but in tenure, Mr. Milbery.
I think he meant it in tenure. Let's not kid ourselves.
I'm not even going to bother redoing that one. I'm just going to let it stand. Exactly.
He took shots. It's all right. It's all right.
And at the other end of the generational gap, we've got our intern with us, Cormac Williamson. The name is not a coincidence. Yes, he is my son, and he is studying computing science at Edinburgh. So this is his final year, and the Stack Overflow bit hit him as well, and he's got some good interesting in bits as well. And as always, Ryan will be leading the charge.
So we have to ask how many earned brews a day does Cormac drink while at university? Yeah.
None while I'm here, but in the UK, definitely.
Yeah,
solidarity,
brother.
It's too expensive to drink over here.
I know.
Yeah.
I can't get over the taste because to me it just feels like I'm drinking double bubble gum, and that's just not the flavor I want to be drinking.
Ryan, that's not
bubble gum.
The point is not the taste. The point is, like, if you're tired or massively hungover, it's basically a chemical refix for your entire body. It's like an IV except you drink it.
Yeah, it's Mountain Dew, but it's orange.
Hey, can I just comment at the start of this thing that apparently somebody at Stack Overflow learned there was a thing called CSS. They've really gussied up this survey this year.
They have.
Yeah, I'm shocked, he said. Look at all the colors and fancy formats.
Yeah, no, I mean, this color scheme, though, I feel like is a little overdone. I mean, I've got Google vibes, I've got Microsoft vibes. Everybody seems to be sticking with those four colors. It's just how do you want to cut them up? All right. Well, let's dive on in. So if we hop on down to the developer profile. So usually they do start with the developer profile for these sort of things. Obviously, like most years, the U.S. did provide the most kind of responses, but we still got a fair number of responses from India and a number of other countries. So let's see. This first one is geography. So again, in terms of high number survey responses, I don't think anybody's terribly surprised by U.S. and India being 1 and 2, just given what we see out in the market.
Yeah, what's surprising is, if they included hackers in this, I'm assuming China and Russia would.
Well, yeah, noted that China and Russia don't appear in any of this. So, we're assuming that China's firewall didn't allow them to contribute.
That's probably true. Yeah, probably right.
In terms of experience, this one I found a little bit interesting, just in terms of how young some people were when they said they first started writing their first line of code, because we're seeing some, it's only 1% granted, but younger than 5 years it's a bit bold. The only thing I can attribute to that is I hope people are counting effectively the STEM toys, since we've had a kind of a surge in those in recent years where it's kind of that and people are just counting that as
I would say it might be sarcasm too, Ryan, but here's what I would say though. We all know that you can't have a profile of somebody who's like a tech founder of a company that doesn't always start with, I wrote my first program when I was like 11 and sold it commercial when I was 12, which I think is generally like a bald-faced lie, right?
Yeah, I mean,
let's be serious here.
Like younger than 5 years? Okay, I mean, yeah, okay. I can include Cormac in that because he tripped over and hit my keyboard once when he was walking. Is that contributing to code? I don't think so. I mean.
Well, we were actually doing a commit into SVN at that time, and he technically committed that block of code by stumbling on that return key. So I would count that. No, but
I've been paying for it ever since. Yeah.
I mean, I think there are some people who are, there are some, I don't want to say gifted or smart, but some people who fall into actual writing code in their teen years. It's a much smaller percentage than they're giving themselves
like
credit
the 11
for
to 17 years. I mean, I get that perfectly. And what'll be interesting is which ones did it that weren't part of their school program.
Or they're counting like a Zapier interface or an Excel macro. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I think people count what are we counting as programming? I think is a little bit of the skews the results here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd also like to see. This is also one of those stats, and there's a couple other ones that obviously would be good to see as well. But in terms of, I'd like to see the year-over-year trend of this, like, because then it actually starts showing how is the workforce kind of trending. Is it a case of we're starting to see a lot more 11 to 17, which means high schools and middle schools are starting to teach it, which means we're going to have a younger force that's hopefully a little bit more skilled, or is it just the people just playing around with it? But it's been just everybody saying that, and that's just the way our profession is.
So, Cormac,
I think the reality though is, I think you're right, Ryan. I think it's naturally going to skew younger every decade that goes on, right? I mean, when I started, the first machine I would touch was a PDP 11, and you had to wear a lab coat, right? So how many people were actually going to be able to write a program?
Oh yeah, accessibility.
Accessibility, right? Right, and it's more than, even in the PC era. Maybe you didn't have a real development platform. You could play around with some languages, but now, heck, you can get most things free on AWS if you wanted to, right? Well, even a powerful computer, you get access to almost any technology. So my expectation, I think, Ryan, is that it's going to continue to skew younger. The 11 to 17 is, maybe they'll get exposed to it in high school and middle schools, but I think it's going to skew to, certainly late teens, early 20s is where this is going to end up, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it would have been nice to get this broken down by the country as well. Like, Cormac, how many people in your school and your high school would have been able to tick one of these boxes?
In my year, very, very little. 2 people. Like, there was never. We didn't get offered computing in high school. So.
And how many kids? How many kids in your class, Cormac? Like, out of a class of how many? Like, your graduating class?
Well, my whole school was like 600 people, so we're talking like 100, 120 people in my year.
Yeah, but it's still not tiny. 2 people out of 120 is still a pretty grotesque percentage.
All right, moving on to learning how to code. Not terribly surprising given what we see. Again, a lot of online resources. Obviously, ours
books are still hanging in there.
Books are still hanging in there. But I feel like most people are doing the YouTube videos, or just there's so many like free code academies now where you can do online tutorials and that sort of stuff. We see so many applications and resumes of people that are not necessarily coming from the traditional background of a bachelor's in science, but instead self-taught and coming along via the various online academies.
I'm surprised that boot camp is the lowest at 10% though. Maybe there's some confusion between a video and other online, because they kind of got 3. If you look at online resources, online courses of certification, and boot camp is low at 10%.
Well, I'm kind of assuming the boot camp maybe is the paid boot camp.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and then looking at it broken down by age, again, no real surprises here. Younger generations tend to be using more online, less physical media, whereas older generations are using more physical books and media. So just get rid of it. It's kind of that whole adage, and can't teach an old dog new tricks. So you kind of tend to keep learning the way you've always learned, I feel like.
Wow, woof.
Yeah, I guess the weird part. Ouch. I guess the weird part though is, if you're 65 and you want to learn about online computers in a book, that probably defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, I really want to learn to water ski, but I don't like water or skiing. So what do I do there?
Years coding, 5 to 9 is seems to be the sweet spot for most people. This doesn't really. It helps kind of inform, I guess, a little bit on some of the later questions in terms of why we may be seeing some of the answers we see. But I don't think there's a whole lot we can gain from this particular.
Well, and I think the other problem you get is, are people? If you look at that age group, so the big bulk here is the 5 to 10 years of coding, and it's 30%, right? If you add in just right around that, you're getting to close to 50% of the respondents. It's probably a little bit of a sampling error too, right? Because you're sending an online survey to people who are the right age to take an online survey. I would argue, right?
Yeah, and probably after maybe 35, you're starting to go into management, so you may not be coding anymore. You're still in the field, but you're right. They may not have ever got the Stack Overflow. I didn't actually see it this year. I didn't.
I never saw it this year.
I didn't either. But here's the thing. So Alan, here's the question about that though. You bring up a great point. If you ever wrote software for a living, right? You got paid by some company, whether you're writing commercial software or writing some, even if you're writing a COBOL report for an internal company, whatever. I don't think anybody, even if you moved up to management, ever stops counting years. Like they don't say, well, I actually wrote code from 22 to 35,
True.
but I've been
They
managing.
still hang on to that.
Yeah, they'll just say, yeah, I still code, right?
Yeah.
It becomes one of those things like it's once you got that merit badge, you never give it back, right? Which I'd used to see actively coding if we had some kind of metric that was realistic to say, have you written any block of code that ended up in production in the past year?
That's a fair comment. Yeah,
it's probably more realistic because somebody who's been coding for 30 years but has been a manager for 15, I seriously doubt. I certainly wouldn't want them writing anything for me.
Looking at years coding professionally, start shifting in the numbers a little bit further down, but I mean, it's still roughly the same bands, which makes sense. It's just most people.
But it does show that there's still there's a huge inexperience in the industry at the moment that's contributing to code.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
All right, but yeah, and well, again, kind of going back to the whole thing, it's the skew effect, I think, as well, because the people I think that are going to be more likely to fill out the survey are going to be fresh college grads early on in their careers, because one, they're using probably Stack Overflow a bit more, and then two, they're going to be probably the ones more likely to actually participate in the surveys. All right, in terms of developer type, senior executives on average are 15 to 16 years of coding experience. Engineering manager 13. I feel like the only thing out of this one that kind of struck me is I felt like the averages were higher than I thought, because pretty much, I mean, looking at all the roles, I mean, student is 4 years, but everything other than that's like 9+ years of experience. Yeah, I would have thought we would have had some younger, like some further skews to the back on some of these roles, because I mean, some of these are just regular like associate level developers, which in my mind, that's somebody that's usually sitting at the 3 to 4 year mark of coding experience, not 9 to 10.
Yeah. So I wonder how, the interesting part is I wonder how they ask this question, right? Because when you look at it, like, do you put in your title first and then they back in the experience to it, right? Again, when you see like senior executive is an average of 15 years. Yeah. I doubt any of those senior executives are writing code, right? I mean, if you ask Mark Benioff, who was originally a software developer, how many years has he been writing code? He's going to say whatever. He's 60 or something. He's probably going to say 40 years, right? But he hasn't probably written a line of code in 20. But he's still He's going to still count that he's writing code. So I still think the sweet spot's probably going to be, and don't count the most of the high school kids writing stuff are just learning how to do it or playing around. I think your first professional job, I think the sweet spot's still going to be kind of 22 to 40 is probably going to be the sweet spot, right?
Further into the developer roles, people holding full stack developer roles are the most prevalent.
Scroll down a bit.
Yeah, that old argument.
Yeah, that's funny. That's like
that's a mythical rule that we know does not exist.
Military intelligence, it's all those, jumbo shrimp. It's right. So let's ask you the question. I mean, I'll start at the top and all the way down. Alan, full stack developer, is that do you believe in it or not?
I don't believe it.
So it's like a unicorn. It's a mythical figure.
Yep.
Cormac?
I think you can do it all. I don't think you can say you're an expert in them all. I think there's definitely people who are dangerous in all of the different areas, but they definitely should. Everybody has a specialty.
Ryan?
Yeah, I don't think anybody could be a true full stack. Well, I think you could probably be a junior or an associate full stack, but I think once you're kind of to Cormac's point, I don't think you can be what I would ever consider a senior full stack, because at that point you should be specializing in one realm or the other, because unless you are just that 1 in a million person that kind of has that mind where you can just soak everything in and become truly an expert in everything. But it's definitely not 50% of people. So
my metaphor here is always, look at the Olympics, since we're in an Olympic year here, right? The decathlon. The person that wins the decathlon generally is placing like second in every event. Right. So in the sprinting, they become second, but they get enough points over all the events to win the overall champion. Right. But in a race against other just sprinters, they'd lose. They get creamed. Right. So I think it's a generalist position. I know why it's in demand, right? Because you got a small company that can't afford to hire, a UI person, a DBA, a back end programmer, front end programmer. They can't afford all those, so they're going to look for somebody who's quote unquote full stack. So you can just at least get something written at every level. But I agree with you, Ryan. You're kidding yourself, except for the very, very few.
Now, the standout one here that I thought was interesting was the developer mobile. I think it's a little bit small because most people are now developing a lot more responsive web designs that's actually acting as a mobile app. So I think people aren't developing specific mobile apps in the same anger as they were maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, and they're probably getting bundled into the full stack role because the responsive full stack
completely.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that some of this is also just would come from the restrictions with a responsive web app inside a container, specifically on the Apple platform, were much tighter years ago, right? I think you can almost get away with writing.
You can
almost
even get
anything.
at the camera now. So it depends on which of the features of the camera of the phone do you really need to get at, and if that's exposed at that level or not. But yeah, interesting. Okay, Ryan, go ahead.
Well, on the just one question. So, on the full stack side of the fence, if you were going in and you were looking at a shop that had a bunch of full stack developers, what sort of like shortfalls would you expect to see in their technology stack? Because it's a bunch of full stack people that don't necessarily have depth or expertise in any particular area.
I mean, what I would say is, if it's any kind of scale, if the company's let's say they've got to 20 developers, then that's a really bad manager, or probably a pair of managers, right? Because you figure teams of 7 are probably the most efficient. Anything above that gets a little inefficient. That if you've got just sort of a couple of teams and 20 developers and you haven't had specialists, you're kidding yourselves, right? So my guess is they may still call themselves a full stack developer, but any manager worth the salt has caused them to specialize at that point, for sure.
And they're probably naturally specializing without them even realizing that they're not specialized. I mean, okay. So I haven't written a single line of API code in the last 4 months. You're not really a full stack developer at that point, are you? You're now stuck on the UI side of the fence. So, I mean, they're probably still calling themselves a full stack developer, but in reality, they may not actually be touching both sides of the fence if they're in a bigger team.
Yeah, I mean, the exceptions to that rule in some cases are, if you're, let's God forbid, let's say you're a Ruby on Rails shop or something like that, because it's sort of a blending between the layers to some degree. Particularly when they're hiding some of the database stuff from you. You could be kidding yourself into thinking you're a full stack developer, but you're developing in somebody's full stack framework at that point, right? And you're living with the restrictions inside that framework.
All right, so next you got educational attainment. So we'll look at professional developers. So among the professional developers, it's kind of good to see that effectively vast majority, what is that, 70-80% have bachelor's degrees or master's degrees. So we still, even though there has been an uptick in self-learning, still seems like at least in the professional world, we still have a fair bit of bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. I know at least in our personal experience, I like to see somebody with a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. I don't necessarily need the master's. I like to see the bachelor's just because I feel like the one thing that is a common theme among self-taught people is they're missing that concept of big O, like thinking about the actual data structures and algorithms they're using when writing the code. Like, yes, the code they're outputting functions. It functions fine, like on whatever data set they're testing with. But then the minute the application goes to scale or it starts getting something unexpected, then that's when their algorithms and stuff, performance just tanks because it just can't handle and cope with,
and they've got a lot
from a fundamental level.
Design patterns is not there. I mean, it's a classic interview question that we use sometimes is, bloom filter, tell us about it. I mean, you've got the sort of deer in headlights look about you say, okay, then you've got a major gap, and it's kind of like the canary in the cage for us for that one.
Yeah, I mean, we've had experience with plenty of developers who are amazing developers and decent architects. But I would say it's the exception that proves the rule. It's some of the soft skills, I would say, that are also more important, right? If you've gone to university, you've got any kind of an education, you had to write a decent paper, do a decent amount of research. I mean, there's some of those other skills that go into being a good software developer that you don't get from just watching a bunch of Udemy courses. And I'm not, I like Udemy as a platform, but if that's all you've done, going to a university, is giving you working with teams, written communications, all the other stuff that you'll need to be a good developer.
Yeah, and the ability to complete something big. I mean, that's
yeah.
And if you definitely go to a Scottish university, you get to know how to drink very well.
If it's not Scottish, it's clap.
All right, let's see. So now we go into a little bit of demographics in terms of age. Vast majority are sitting between 18 to 44. That's pretty much your sweet spot. Again, not. I mean, I'd say it kind of aligns, I feel like, with the workforce to a certain extent. Like that's kind of the breakdown I tend to interact with. So nothing surprising there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to see this. I think this is going to skew up over time, Ryan, as the age groups, there's more and more software development being done. This is still an industry that was, probably exploded after 2000, right? I mean, the first independent software platform showed up in the 70s. The 80s was still the age of the mini computer. The PC broke us into client servers. The last 20 years, right? Call it 2001 to 2021 have been the explosion of this. This should creep up, right? Because you figure most people are going to be employed professionally from the age of maybe 25 to 65. And there's only so many managers, right? So I think you're going to see developers. It's, you don't want to be a manager and you're a software developer. Well, your other choice is just keep being a software developer of some sort, right? So I think I expect to see this skew older and older every year we do this.
Yeah. Another instance where if Stack Overflow happens to be listening, I'd like to see a year-over-year graph.
And I think they would tell you that, can you download the data separately and use
I think you can actually.
I think there's another member of the MacLaurin team, if I'm not mistaken, that does a lot of data analytics. He might be a specialist in that area. He may have some skills.
I'll have to ask Kelly if such a person exists.
Yeah, I think it feels like that person exists somewhere in the MacLaurin group.
Right, no surprise there.
Gender, yeah, still predominantly male by a large thing. Again, this is another one I'd like to see year over year. Like, is it at least trending towards more women are getting into it?
So for our listeners who aren't looking at it, I mean, I think you should look at this. If you're listening to this podcast, pull up the Stack Overflow, Google Stack Overflow Developer Survey 2021, right? And you can follow along with us if you want to. It's shameful that 93% by gender are men, with a smattering of everything else. That's.
But that seems to align, like we were talking with Cormac a couple of days ago, like even in his year at the moment at uni, there's only a handful of females.
Right, because it's
30.
Right, because it's still. I mean, I think we have to make opportunities to make that happen, right? It's always tough to be. It's a tough business to be in anyway. And if you're the only woman in a class of 30 men in university taking computer science, it's got to be a grind. It's got to be a grind. There's got to be a way to balance this over time.
Let's see. Vast majority are not transgendered. The numbers say prefer. 1% were yes. So, and given the way current things are moving, not terribly surprising. Again, I would hope that becomes more inclusive over time. But
I mean, at the highest level, here's what I would tell you. I don't care what you are.
I know I find these questions this interesting this year because it's like I don't care. The male female is interesting in terms of we need to do more, and we're not really evolving much since Jim and I. We started out 30, 40 years ago, but holy crap, I don't care about the sexual orientation at this point. It does not make you a different developer at all.
Right. The only line I care about is if you call yourself a full stack developer.
Yeah.
Right. Because then it's and I'm not saying I'm not and it's not that I wouldn't hire a full stack developer, but I generally ask the question of, great, but what if you had a choice? If I made you, if I'm doing the Jeremy Irons from Margin Call, if I made you, how would you do it? What would you say you are? Back end, middle tier, or front end developer? Almost everybody's has a choice, right? They're gonna have a go-to.
Continue the demographics, sexual orientation, vast majority straight, heterosexual, prefer not to say is coming at 5. So again, not terribly important. Race and ethnicity, predominantly white. So yeah, I mean, this is again one of those cases where I'd like to see the trend over time, because hopefully what we would be seeing is a trend towards more diversity in the work group. Looking at it each year, even with snapshots right now, it's still a little depressing because it's obviously very straight, male, white, dominant. We'd like to see that skewing to a more diverse group over time, but that's where I need the time over time to say, are we heading in the right direction? Are we stagnating? It's hard to tell all of this.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is, if it's true that we're short developers in this world, and I think that's probably true, and it's going to continue to be true because more things are technical. I mean, you could make the argument that people are going to have to learn to be more technical over time. I mean, everything is more complicated than it was.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, if you look at it that way, it's like we should be reaching out to everybody we possibly can to fill this bucket of, needing developers.
Yeah. It also shows, we've got a huge untapped demographics that we haven't truly touched yet.
The disability one I found interesting just from a perspective of, I think it's interesting to see what disabilities people are overcoming to continue to do programming. And I would, this is one of those cases where I'd actually love to see how they're going about to overcome some of these, because I think that's just comes to show where technology is starting to make certain aspects more accessible. Like, prime example being, if you're blind or have difficulty seeing, okay, you can probably learn the keyboard and go at it, but you're probably still going to be using a little bit of text to speech. Same thing with ones that can't type. Like, obviously, if you can't type, then you got to be using some form of either vision gaze or a text to speech to text. Like, how far is that technology coming to help those people out? Mental health, nothing. 10% anxiety disorder. I'd be intrigued again to see how that's changing over time. That could just be a sign in terms of, are people feeling overworked, or is it just
I don't know, Ryan. I would make the argument on this. So some of these questions, like mental health questions, some of this I think is skewed by, as time goes on, I think it's true, and I hope it's true. People are being more, feeling more comfortable about talking about their
right.
issues or challenges, right? That 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you
would never have dreamed of saying that.
You wouldn't say it. So it's you wonder whether it's the percentages are getting higher because they're getting higher, or is it because the people are actually being honest about, I don't know how, and I don't mean this in a funny way, and I don't mean this in an insulting way at all. If you're in software, we all have high anxiety to some degree. I don't care how good you are, because we've all pushed something out, that is, I don't know, that's, now it's clearly different than having a diagnosed anxiety disorder, for sure. But man, software development, if any career creates anxiety, in my opinion, software development is it.
Yeah.
All right, moving into technology. So.
Yeah, we can skip over some of these bits because it's very repetitive, but yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of most popular technologies, programming, scripting, and markup languages, no big surprise here. JavaScript.
Hit the professional developers really quick.
Yeah,
I think it's,
that's better.
So yeah, still JavaScript, HTML, and SQL are the top three. JavaScript's out in front with 60, almost 70%. HTML, CSS is 55, 60, and SQL's at 50. So I feel like if you're not doing one of those three things, it's a little unusual for at least any form of semi-modern day stack to not be touching JavaScript, if some form of front end or some form of database that isn't a SQL database.
Yeah, I mean, this one always drives me crazy because it's, really, I would break these into other categories. Like you see, Bash shell and PowerShell being, two languages, and I'm not arguing that they're, they are not languages, but I would say that you'd have to be in DevOps if you're spending a lot of time.
Yeah, but even in that
PowerShell,
situation,
Bash.
If you're not gonna, like, would I have ticked that box? No, but have I written plenty of shells in the last? Yes, only as a quick utility to do something,
right.
But I'm not being paid to do shell programming.
Right.
So I think that's a bit skewed. But some of the stuff down the bottom is
but on a, if you're looking at somebody who's doing, maintaining lots of VMs or that kind of stuff, they could be doing a ton of PowerShell or a ton of, Bash stuff. That probably is what they're doing for the most part, right? With system configuration kind of stuff. Surprising, but I just think the way they put these languages in, because it's a, and it's a long tail, man. I mean, COBOL's still there.
An assembly.
The person still writing assembly.
Wait, where the heck is where's Power Builder? Is Power Builder seriously not on here and Delphi still is?
Oh no, yeah, I think it's slipped off.
Wow. That's odd.
This was the year.
I mean, Delphi was behind Power Builder. I mean, I would put Power, I mean, just from wouldn't you, Alan, from at its heyday, it was clearly the biggest. All right.
In terms of databases, MySQL's still out in front with Postgres close behind. Then you get SQLite and Microsoft SQL Server. And then the first NoSQL database would be MongoDB, sitting there at 28%.
Yeah, no, I love to see them this broken out. I think most companies we work with are hybrids, right? They're going to use NoSQL for some stuff and SQL-based databases for some stuff. So I usually like to see those things separate. Surprising how strong Postgres has come on for something that's been around. I mean, Postgres has been around since after the Ingress project. I mean, Stonebreaker it's Postgres because it was after Ingress, Postgres. Yeah. Since the 80s, that thing has been sitting around and gained no traction in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years. But it has leapt
in features. I mean, we're using it pretty much exclusively now for the last 2 or 3 projects we've done, and the authentication model and its JSON support outstrips MySQL. And now that AWS supports it with their Aurora service, I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like old home week, right? Because a lot of the utilities were the same. Now, I would tell you that what surrounds Postgres is weak, right? Because it's a process per user architecture. So you're using to get like a connection pooling, you're using third-party utilities like PG Bounce that are not even close. A backup and recovery. I mean, there's a lot of missing things from the Postgres world. It's our go-to at this point too, but I see a huge opportunity there for tooling around that platform that's available for MySQL.
What'll be interesting in this one is which databases did you start a new project with versus the ones that you're maintaining at the moment? And I would suspect that SQL Server would drop dramatically on that list.
Yeah. It should. It's still. I mean, for the tooling, there's a ton of tooling around SQL Server, right? And no one's going to argue at this point that, I mean, there was a time you and I, would say, Alan, that, the reason you didn't pick SQL Server was because you might need to run your database on a big honking Unix box, right? And that was the big flaw, was you were sort of stuck with SQL Server and NT. So your biggest single database server was of a fixed size, not related to being able to run like a giant, Oracle server or Sybase on a big Solaris box, right? Now that's that architecture doesn't exist anymore, so it's no longer a problem, right? Still, if you are looking for a commercial database, I would certainly pick SQL Server over Oracle from a cost benefit, a cost performance standpoint. I wouldn't pick either one of them, but if I had to for the tooling around it, it's still cost effective on a relative basis.
I think the disruptor, or it will be interesting to see how big of a disruptor it'll be, will be when AWS releases general availability. It's Babelfish, which is effectively trying to start getting people that are on traditional Microsoft SQL servers being able to just drop and replace in a Postgres database. Because now you no longer have that. If they get it right to where you can truly just kind of just seamlessly switch over and put Babelfish in between your database, then it'll be interesting to see how many people take advantage of that to move off of Microsoft SQL Server to Postgres and not pay those licensing fees.
Well, the enterprise DB guys, so they sort of commercialized Postgres. There were 2 big groups, Enterprise DB and Second Quadrant, and they merged. So that's one. Enterprise DB has both of those big units underneath them. They've got a similar product to pull Oracle databases into the Postgres school, including supporting PL SQL, which is the big. So they've got a PL SQL module. I wonder what their traction has been, on doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting because it's what's the argument to go to the business beyond obviously the cost savings. Right, in terms of cloud,
no surprise here.
Yep, AWS out in front by almost 60%. Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud were much closer than I thought they would be.
Yeah,
Microsoft Azure is at almost 33, and then Google Cloud Platforms at almost 30, so only about 3%.
And I'm really intrigued to know who the hell is using Oracle.
Yeah.
Well, so if you're using Oracle, it's an Oracle customer, right?
Yeah.
And here's what I think probably skews these numbers. It's probably people using the Oracle ERP products, right? Hosted versions of those could be, yeah, because that running on Oracle's infrastructure is fine. I mean, what's interesting is, we look at AWS and Azure, right? Our go-to in our portfolio is generally AWS, but we have companies on Azure, and I'm mostly ambivalent either way. We have nobody on Google Cloud because that tends to be, in our business, tends to be the guys that are venture guys are doing the Google stuff as opposed to.
Well, funny you should say that. The only two portfolios that we know about on Google are they consider themselves startups as opposed to established businesses.
Right. Right, and that's the VC. Yeah, that's why I think it's a VC world.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, what's breaking up, I'd love to see the long tail on this, right? Because the MariaDB guys have, their own hosting platform now. So what is it, Maria Sky DB or whatever it is. So it's MariaDB and their own custom hosted platform. So a lot of these, we're starting to see some specialized platforms, and I wonder if that's actually going to be a workable strategy on a go-forward basis, right?
Yeah. I also find it interesting that they put Heroku in here when Heroku is just a wrapper over top of AWS. So
Heroku is the only one that we've ever done in uni so far. We did a lot of Heroku.
I know why Heroku. Yeah, I mean Heroku definitely simplifies some things because God knows the AWS console is not always the easiest thing to understand, even if you do it every day. But yeah, it's like, to me, I don't know if I would have classified it into the other cloud platforms since it's just effectively a wrapper over top of AWS. All right, let's see what we got next. Web frameworks.
Oh, here's a controversial one.
So
professional
this
developers.
Developers.
Hit the professional developers.
Yeah, there you go. React.js surpassed jQuery for the first time.
Wow.
React.js is up there at 41%, and jQuery is at, let's go with 35.
That's got to hurt, Alan.
I rarely bump into people. I rarely bump into apps that are written in React. I mean, jQuery and Angular and Express, yes, but rarely bump into stuff with React. Everybody's doing it, but where the hell are they doing it?
I did not expect that reaction from you. So, thank you.
Well, I tried to express my opinion quickly there.
Wow, that's a nice Angular you had on that. I didn't
Thank
see
you.
what
I knew you'd spring into that action.
I've got a jQuery for you about that last thing. Let me just take a sip out of my flask.
Really going off the rails.
Okay.
So I think to Ryan's point of year over year or 5 year numbers, it's not a surprise you see Ruby on Rails sinking. I think the shine has come off that pumpkin to some degree. The rumor is even the Basecamp guys are using Go for some back end stuff, right? And they invented Rails.
Yeah, it's never a good sign.
Well, or it's a sign that says, you know what? I mean, my argument on Ruby on Rails has always been, if you'd like to build yourself a web-based project management platform, it's a great language and framework because that's what they built it for, right? It makes sense, but using it for everything, I don't know.
Next category, Ryan.
Now we go to other frameworks and libraries. Not quite sure why we needed another one, but .NET Framework and .NET Core, .NET 5 sit out in front with pretty much 37-35%. And then you get into a variety of ones that I'm not overly familiar with, but these...
Yeah, I would argue that some of these are not really...
They're not frameworks. TensorFlow and NumPy.
And Hadoop isn't, and Spark. I mean, they're just logging frameworks, or logging platforms. And the big absence here, of course, is Java. I mean, where's Java Enterprise? And technically Spring should be in there.
Yeah, well, they put Spring in a web framework.
That's what I mean. It's from the web side of things, yes, but there's still Spring at the back end.
Yeah, I would argue that they wrote these questions wrong. I would have put like front end framework versus back end framework, right? Is what the surprising part is. I don't know if you guys have played around .NET Core at all. Given that I grew up in the Microsoft era when the evil empire, .NET Core is not a bad product. They certainly simplified some of the heavier .NET stuff, and it is multi-platform. And we've successfully built stuff on Mac and flopped it over to Windows, and it runs, which I know you can do in other languages. I'm not saying that's not something that's heretofore impossible, but it was heretofore impossible with the Microsoft stack for sure.
Looking at other tools, so pretty much everybody's using Git.
No surprise there.
No surprise, yeah. And it's still, I think, a little surprising just in terms of like you just don't see anything besides Git anymore. It's kind of like I know when I started out, which was 10 years ago, SVN was still pretty popular, and now you don't hardly see anybody using it. It's pretty much all just some flavor of Git.
And even in those days, it was SVN versus CVS. I mean, still it was those two that were pairing up. But now it's just Git. There's no other pairing.
I mean, it's. I mean, I understand why, right? I mean, Git was designed, primarily around the open source project with lots of different contributors. You know what I mean? Which is not, I still like SVN as a platform, and I don't care if it's Git, but it's, I think Git became the kind of go-to, open source contributors, even though a relatively small percentage of developers actually contribute to open source.
Yeah.
Versus how many people claim they do.
A bit over half are using Docker, which I like to see. I personally really like Docker. I think that just goes to show how Docker has kind of really, because there's obviously the Docker that you're running on the server to actually deploy your application, but with this many people using it, that's got to be a large portion of people that are using Docker locally for development, which I would attribute a lot of that to the likes of the Docker Compose sort of aspect, which makes it very easy for people that don't necessarily have a strong DevOps background to still be able to run a Docker container locally without a lot of effort or setup.
Yeah, and I would argue that most of those people don't really understand what they're doing with the Docker. They're just running it up, and it's providing some service for them on their local machine, and they're happy for that. I mean, it's just another script they run up, and it just happens to be Docker that's powering that. But it's a great technology for that very reason. Yeah,
I mean, I for some stuff that we do, because we don't always make the choice in our portfolio, we've got SQL Server, and I'm using Docker to run the SQL Server Linux. It's great. I can run on my Mac OS box, much less overhead. You can copy those bad boys around. So it's much easier to have, as you know, if you're working on multiple companies and multiple projects, having a quick way to swap out one company's setup for the other company's setup when you're working is, Docker's been great for that. Now, I think Swarm was a disaster, right? They sort of got rid of the enterprise stuff. I think they sold it to Mirantis or something like that. So, I don't think they've been able to capitalize on being the guys that effectively invented the container, but.
I'm surprised to see Yarn on the list, especially since we don't see NPM. Yarn was out. I know that was big a number of years ago, especially when NPM was kind of a hot mess there in the early days. I think the fact that this is this low just shows that NPM's closed the gap, but it's surprising.
Well, given how much JavaScript was a big contributor in the previous response, NPM should have been here somewhere, or it just wasn't.
Well, I think NPM now comes with Node, right? That was recent.
Yeah. So I guess they are just associating it together.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of shit that's you get a lot of utilities. I see a ton of them on the Mac that are just node based stuff doing whatever.
20% at Kubernetes was a bit surprising to me. I know that is the new hotness for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think most people don't realize what that is yet, because they're using it and they're not even scratching the power of what that thing's supposed to be for. I mean, nobody's running anywhere near the volume of Docker instances that would become useful for them.
Right. So yeah.
I think that's a resume filler in terms of, I'm going to learn to use this just in case it comes up.
I would say it another way, Alan. I'd say it is most problems that you're solving with Docker don't require Kubernetes. Right. I think people are pairing them up now that, we're going to do a Docker, so we need Kubernetes. I'd make the same argument you're making, that in 90% of the cases, they just need Docker. They don't need Kubernetes.
Yeah. And the container managed services at the AWS and Azure are taking up most of that load from the Kubernetes stuff. So, anyway.
And then rounding out the top 5, Terraform. I just got to call that one out because Terraform is my favorite. So,
is it really?
Let that slide by. Love me some Terraform.
You're a Terraform junkie, really?
Yeah.
He won't even let me touch the AWS console anymore. I spin up like an SQS queue. It'll delete all of a sudden, and then it'll be back. I said, where the hell did that go? It's in a Terraform script now. God damn it!
Well, that's Ryan's way of controlling you.
It is. Yeah. I mean,
right.
He's supposed to be in.
It's a hard order some days.
I realize that. Yeah. The secret is the venti signature hot chocolate from Starbucks, Ryan. Yeah. He goes into a coma. He lapses into a coma as he puts on a full stone in one afternoon. And that's when you can actually get him. Superman had kryptonite, venti signature hot chocolate.
Right. Integrated development environment, aka your IDE. So out in front is Visual Studio Code. I personally made that switch probably about 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, I love
Studio Code. Yeah.
I think it's great. I mean, I always hated Eclipse. It was so fat. Yeah. It was such a fat pig. it was just a pain in the ass to manage.
Yeah, I enjoyed Eclipse when I was doing just Java development. I enjoyed Eclipse. I had experience with IntelliJ, and I definitely preferred IntelliJ. I just couldn't afford IntelliJ. So Eclipse was which was fine with doing Java. But now that most shops are using, you kind of going back to the full stack, but even if you're not full stack, you tend to be doing
I'm a big IntelliJ person now. Love it.
Yeah, but I mean, Visual Studio Code, I just love being able to open up pretty much any file and then have the intelligent response, whether it's JavaScript, Java, Terraform scripts, Docker, it doesn't really matter.
I don't believe there's 24% of people using VI. I mean, a Notepad to do development.
I don't know, man. There's some people that are really hardcore into their Vim.
Well, here's what I would tell you. They may be, I didn't see the question whether you could have multiple answers, but this may fall in the category of, it's just like I use Visual Studio Code for almost everything, but I have BB Edit for a couple of things that I've always used it for, and so I still open BB Edit for a few things on the Mac that I don't pollute my Visual Studio
completely.
environment.
And like I said, we've got Notepad, and we were dipping in and out of Vim. Would I ever write a Java program in Notepad? Hell no.
No, but I will say the beauty of this versus 20 years ago for sure, Alan, maybe 10 years ago, the visual development environments where you were dropping something, on a pallet and it was generating code behind you, those have fallen off, thank God, because that just created terrible developers because you didn't actually know what you were doing. You didn't actually, it was doing it for you.
What the hell was that one called? Visual J++ was IBM's tool for Java.
Yeah.
Drag and drop the swing components and suddenly, boom, all this crap was developed somewhere.
It was like Oracle J developer. It was Oracle J developer. Good Lord.
Which
terrible.
I think was a fork from NetBeans, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah,
that came from something. Which NetBeans, I noticed, was still hanging in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a blast from the past.
Good Lord.
Operating system, vast majority of people are Windows. But it is good to see Linux-based is beating out Mac OS by just a smidgen. Oh, hang on. Sorry, that was all respondents. I take it back. Professional developers are still Mac OS. Come on, people. That's such hope.
No, but look, here's what's really interesting is I still haven't gone to the new M1 chip yet. So, I ended up in the Mac world by accident because my wife is a Mac person because she's an artist and she used like Photoshop and Illustrator to do canvas planning, right? And so you're home on the weekend and the Wi-Fi is not working or she can't connect to the printer. And if you're married, this is not a good response. This is a good lesson for you, Cormac. If your wife says, I can't get on the printer, and your response is, well, get a real computer and I'll help you. That's really not great for marriage, I found. That sort of interferes with the whole, unless you get a really comfortable sofa that you don't mind sleeping on. So when they came out with the Intel-based Macs, right, I just ran boot camp, right? I just ran Windows all week long. And the weekends I just booted to Mac OS to kind of, all right, I can make sure I know how to get on the network, get printers running and keep things going at home, whatever. And then, they started adding software that wasn't available for Mac that, stuff you used to use in Windows. It's like more and more you're on that platform. I music scanned into that platform because I was an early iPod user, and you sort of fall into it. It's like wake up 20 years later and I'm a Mac OS guy, right?
Well, we use Windows as our primary desktop. However, we run, again, going back to each portfolio, we've got effectively a Linux image that we run in a VM virtual box for that one.
Yeah.
So we would tick both boxes, Linux-based and Windows here.
Yeah, so would we. I mean, I don't think any of our portfolio companies, even I don't know anybody who runs their Postgres databases on Windows, right? They're running the Linux versions of Postgres, and which means you're probably doing some stuff in, at least the script level in Linux. So,
right, Ryan, we're running out of time here. So, do you want to? Is there any other big sections you want to?
Let's get the loved versus dread.
Yeah. So the loved, Rust is still way on front. So the people that are doing Rust still really love it. I can't say I have had any direct experience with it, so I can't. I've heard some of the arguments as to why people love it, but I can't.
What's your what? What's the thing you hear that's like that? Ooh, gotta have it.
Well, it's supposed to be like extremely kind of like what I would almost say developer safe. Like, so it's highly performant, but even when it's highly performant, it doesn't have a lot of the pitfalls that you get from the likes of a Java. So, for example, like when it comes to like multi-threading in Rust, you can do a lot of multi-threading in Rust and be very fast multi-threading, but you don't have to worry about some of the pitfalls that Java can throw your way if you don't truly know how to do threading properly. So I feel like it's abstracting a lot of concepts away from people, but keeping that performance and speed is what I've heard. So like I said, and as long as it checks all those boxes, I can see why people love it, because you effectively get to write fast code without doing as much work or thought. So yeah,
I mean, I'm surprised. The ones what surprised me is the fat middle of this. Like Go, F# is a very specific language. Go and C# are kind of 60-40ish, right? Love, hate. That surprises me because they're
But be careful here. This graph doesn't like Ryan. How many people actually responded to the Rust one?
Of course, yeah.
There's only 5,000 people responded to that one versus say JavaScript, which was like probably the lion's share.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's fans. So you're saying it's fanboys. Fanboys is what you're saying.
Yeah, it could be a little bit. I mean, there's a couple of these graphs that Stack Overflow have done is a little bit disingenuous because it makes it look like that graph, for example, made it look like COBOL, for example. There's only 69 people did that, but it shouldn't even be in the same graph of this. So yeah.
But what's funny is the hate for COBOL, right?
Oh, it's strong in those 69 people.
Yeah, well, look at the hate. The hate is what the hate is 368. So those are probably people that are stuck in a mainframe or iSeries shop that would love to be doing the new stuff, and their boss is like, "Nope, you're still writing COBOL."
Same love versus Reddit. Everybody loves Redis and Postgres. Though, I mean, for the most part, you gotta there's a 50 split for most of them. Nobody likes IBM DB2, which can't really blame them.
It's a dead platform. I mean, I think Oracle's. I don't hate PL SQL. I think the price of it is a nightmare, right? It's still super expensive, and they got to squeeze every dollar out of you they possibly can because that's their workhorse at Oracle is the database.
I'm a little surprised Cassandra's as high as it is, but I have a feeling this is developers that just have to interact with Cassandra. Cassandra's great for just dealing with the data, but from a DevOps perspective, in terms of having to actually maintain the servers that Cassandra runs on, it's a bit of a nightmare.
Well, it's like Hadoop. Hadoop's a great thing from an API point of view if you don't have to manage the bloody network underneath it.
Yeah. Let's see, platforms. AWS is still fairly loved. Google platform, they're all pretty.
Oh
IBM
my
Cloud
God, IBM Cloud is hilarious. That's another one. You're stuck on the IBM Cloud. Oof.
Vettel. I was not familiar with this one. It's apparently a newer framework coming out. ASP.NET Core, Fast API. So yeah, I suppose.
Well, it's interesting that Angular is mostly dreaded, but yet is way popular.
Yeah.
I wonder if
jQuery is massively popular, but that one's definitely dreaded.
Right.
I don't understand
wonder
that at all.
I wonder if the Angular is the Angular 1 versus Angular 2 guys, right? Like if you're just starting on Angular now, you're probably fine. If you were one of the poor bastards that had converted Angular 1 to an Angular 2 project, you probably hate yourself.
In terms of the other tools, everybody seems to be pretty happy with Git, Docker, Kubernetes, and Terraform. So
yep.
Good. Collaboration tools. Yeah. Nothing terribly surprising here. These are pretty charts. If anybody gets to go through the developer survey, once you get down to the programming and scripting work versus not want, beautiful graphs, hard to interpret.
I mean,
that looks like a spirograph. Remember a spirograph? Yeah. That wheel with the colored pencils? You went back and forth.
I mean, clearly somebody at Stack Overflow thought, we've got a new control. We're going to use this bad boy.
Yeah, somebody bought high charts.
But forgot to actually figure out, is it actually useful? And we've tried to interpret it, and we've come up with 3 different, including that person within the MacLaurin group that does do this stuff. He kind of had to tilt his head thinking, I don't think they've got that quite right.
Right, in terms of what do you do when you get stuck? No surprise here, people are still Googling, which then leads you to Stack Overflow.
Which is bizarre, because you Google it, and usually it's a Stack Overflow question that comes up as the first answer.
Right, well, the trick is this, though. It's like, I would rather understand where you actually got your answer, right? Because if it's clear on Stack Overflow, great. If you have to ask a follow-on question, do you really want the flame? Because you're always going to get flamed, whatever. And the number one flame is, some wonker going, this is the wrong thread for that question. I627, but I'm closing this thread. Those are the.
Oh, you shouldn't be doing it that way. Go back to Ryan. But there is a significant amount of people that are meditating to see if they can solve the problem.
And playing games.
Wow.
Playing games I get. Playing games you can go for distraction and then come back. That I can get, but panic.
I panic. I like panic. Panic is when you did like RM minus R star. And you're quickly going to, how do I reverse that?
Oh shit, that was the production window, not the development window.
Exactly.
DynamoDB is apparently the top paying technology in terms of databases. Not too surprising by that, but IBM DB2, the legacies, it's not too far behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think you find when it's top paying for anything, it's either the hottest new thing or keeping something old running, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the rest of this is, most people are full-time. Yeah, I think the rest of this, we just go into the stuff. There's a little bit of stuff on the salary stuff at the bottom. Here we go, salary by developer type. I think the main interesting thing from here, which is, it makes sense given what we see. When you look at the salaries for all respondents, it's definitely significantly lower than in the United States. The United States is still definitely paying more for talent.
So just as a here you go, Ryan. 1983.
Mm-hmm.
It was a university, not a student job. It was for the universities, not academic computing center, but the systems that ran the college. First programming job. What do you think my annual salary was? 1983.
What was the price of a car back then?
Yeah, that's what I would go.
Did they have cars?
30?
Did they have color?
Is your guess? Your guess is 30,000?
Let's go to 30. Yeah.
12.5.
Oh.
12.5 and free tuition. 12.5 and free tuition.
And were you living like a king on campus with that?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So yeah. I don't know whether it's certainly, I think, done better than inflation over these years because we haven't had a ton of inflation since the early 80s. But all right, so just overall, are we surprised by anything?
Not really.
No.
I mean, it's some of the questions. I mean, we always find this they're a little bit nebulous. It could have been tightened up a wee bit, but overall, it's going in what our gut tells us is the case.
There's a couple shockers for me though. I'm actually shocked that Power Builder still is not on there. It goes to show you that the vast majority of client server applications must have been killed off that aren't ERP applications, because if if we looked at the numbers, what percent of commercial software is developed in Power Builder in 1995, Alan? I mean, that number would have been off the charts, right? And
was Visual Basic still in that list?
I think at least VBA was. I think Visual Basic looks like it dropped off too, which is a surprise to me. That you would think there's still some of that stuff living out there.
I mean, we still come into that with our portfolios all the time with Visual Basic, so it's still there.
Yeah, you wonder what they're doing with it. It's just dying off, or people just don't care about those applications. It's weird.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just, you would think that those were.
Well, the one we surprised, I guess, was how much bigger AWS was to Azure, because I know Azure is a wee bit behind, but I always thought Azure was a strong second horse in the race, and clearly the Google platform is a bit closer to Azure than I thought it was.
I would say that was a bit surprising. I would have thought Azure would have had at least some form of a lead over it. They're just pretty much neck and neck.
Yeah, I would expect Azure to pull away over time. I don't think it overtakes AWS, but there's enough. It may be just part and parcel of the fact that the more you get away from the operating system. I mean, we used to be operating system centric when we built software. Do you really care where you build it now? No. I don't think you really care. So, the losing the Windows and SQL Server, SQL Server base. What's the reason to go with Microsoft versus AWS or something else, right?
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, that was an interesting journey. Same time next year.
Next year. Maybe we'll be more surprised next year.
Given the uptick in remote, I wouldn't be surprised if they start introducing some of the questions in and around kind of remote work and how much that's shifting
Slack
people.
versus Team versus, I would like to see that sort of collaborative tools. Like, which video conferencing tool are we playing in the most these days?
Yeah, and some of the like Miro and Mural. One of the things they don't cover is the crossover to product management, Airtable, Trello, some of the, I think ancillary tooling that surrounds what people do for a living, I think seems to be more.
And I would imagine next year we're going to see working from home as a category there.
Yeah.
How often am I in the office versus exclusively at home? But fascinating. Well, Mr. Milbery, it was always a pleasure. Never a
always
chore.
A pleasure. You boys look like you're all doing well. Good luck here in the next short window of time, my friend. Since you're effectively doubling, are you doubling the number of?
We'd be doubling the number of children.
Yes, there we go. Well, your wife may count you in that, so you may only get by 33%. Right? Always a pleasure. Hopefully, I'll see you gentlemen in person sometime here soon.
Indeed. And good.